Welcome to an introductory training on New York State workers' compensation. This training is designed to give you a high-level overview of what workers' compensation is, the role of the New York State Workers' Compensation Board, the role that medical providers play in the New York State workers' compensation system, and how medical providers can become board-authorized providers. Let's start with an overview of workers' compensation, or workers' comp, as it's commonly called. Workers' compensation provides benefits to workers who have been injured or become ill as a direct result of their job. Workers' comp has existed since some of the earliest written laws. The pirates in the Caribbean even had workers' comp. There are a couple of dates that are important to the establishment of New York's workers' compensation system. On March 25, 1911, the day after the Court of Appeals invalidated what was then called Workmen's Compensation Law, 146 workers died in the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, the worst industrial disaster in New York State in the 20th century. It caused public outrage and inspired sweeping changes in labor laws nationally, including in New York State, which passed its own progressive protections for workers. In 1914, the New York State Workers' Compensation Board was formed, and the Workers' Compensation Law took effect. The outrage over the fire led to changes in the state constitution, and that same year, also as a result of the fire, the New York State Department of Labor was formed, setting important standards for wages, hours, sanitary conditions, and workplace safety. The New York State Insurance Fund, or NYSIF, was also established in 1914 as part of the original enactment of the Workers' Compensation Law requiring employers in New York to provide coverage. Under the law, employers could insure through private carriers by self-insuring or by obtaining coverage from NYSIF. NYSIF is the largest provider of workers' compensation in New York State. It competes with all private carriers in the state. It's important to note that the Workers' Compensation Board is separate from NYSIF. As an insurance carrier, NYSIF pays insurance claims, while the board oversees the system. So, what exactly is workers' compensation? Workers' compensation is a no-fault insurance system that provides coverage for on-the-job accidents, injuries, and illnesses, including occupational diseases, provides cost of medical care for workers who are injured or become ill as a direct result of their job, provides wage replacement and protection for both employers and their employees. Employers are required to provide workers' compensation coverage for their employees. Employers pay for this insurance and cannot require employees to contribute to the cost of coverage. Who is eligible for workers' compensation? Injured workers are entitled to workers' compensation. Insurers must report incidents to the board. Workers can also file a claim, but it's not mandatory. Workers have 2 years to file claims, with the exception of claims related to the World Trade Center. When are claims paid? A claim is paid if the employer or insurance carrier agrees that the injury or illness is work-related. If the employer or insurance carrier disputes the claim, no cash benefits are paid until the workers' compensation law judge decides who is right. So, who needs workers' compensation insurance? All for-profit businesses that have employees or workers that the Workers' Compensation Board considers employees are required to have workers' compensation coverage. These workers can include day laborers, leased and borrowed staff, volunteers, part-time workers, family members, and many subcontractors. Most nonprofit organizations also need to provide workers' compensation coverage. Employers who have domestic workers and home health care aides living in their residence or working 40 hours a week also need to provide workers' compensation coverage. If an employer has live-in help, hours spent sleeping count toward those 40 hours. Now let's discuss the role of the New York State Workers' Compensation Board. The New York State Workers' Compensation Board is not an insurer or payer of claims, but plays an important role in the workers' compensation system. The board administers and oversees the workers' compensation system in New York. It ensures that employers carry the mandatory insurance, receives copies of all claim documents, and conducts hearings before a law judge as needed. Medical providers also play an important role in the New York State workers' compensation system. Medical providers must be authorized by the Workers' Compensation Board and are responsible for administering necessary medical care to claimants and for documenting treatment rendered. More details and training related to specific types of medical providers are available on the board's website. Authorized providers. For years, only physicians, chiropractors, podiatrists, and psychologists could obtain authorization to treat injured workers. As part of Governor Cuomo's 2019-2020 budget, a new law was passed expanding the types of medical providers who can be authorized to treat injured workers in the New York State Workers' Compensation System, effective January 1, 2020. These new provider types include licensed clinical social workers, nurse practitioners, and acupuncturists, as well as physician assistants, occupational therapists, and physical therapists. The law was designed to modernize and improve the workers' compensation healthcare options available to injured workers. It's expected to bring thousands of new providers into the New York State Workers' Compensation System. When it comes to the medical provider's role, providers may be asked to comment on the causal relationship between the injury and any subsequent disability or death. It's important to note that the medical opinion must indicate sufficient probability as to the cause of the injury and must be supported by a rational basis. They may comment on the diagnosis and proper treatment, and permanency, including permanent partial disability, schedule loss of use, or permanent partial disability, non-schedule loss of use. The claimant's benefit rate is based on a percentage of the loss of wage earning capacity. Additional training on impairment guidelines for determining schedule loss of use and non-schedule loss of use awards is available on the Workers' Compensation Board website, wcb.ny.gov. Providers may also be asked to comment on the claimant's ability to work and the extent or degree of disability, including temporary partial disability and temporary total disability. Disability is expressed as a percentage, with the following as guides: mild, 25%, mild to moderate, 33.3%, moderate, 50%, moderate to marked, 66.67%, and marked, 75%. A temporary partial disability means the claimant has temporarily lost some ability to work and earn full wages. A temporary total disability means the claimant cannot work and earn wages in any job. Disability is expressed at 100% for a temporary total disability. Let's now discuss what medical providers should know about medical reports. Healthcare providers are responsible for completing and submitting medical reports to the New York State Workers' Compensation Board, the insurance carrier, and the claimant's attorney or licensed representative, if applicable. The board is transitioning to Form CMS 1500, which is already familiar to most medical providers. When filing this form, medical providers must also attach a medical narrative report. It's important to note, providers must complete a registration for XML form submission on the board's website prior to submitting Form CMS 1500 and the required medical narrative report. Detailed information on the Form CMS 1500 requirements can be found on the board's website at the URL showing on your monitor. Medical reports submitting. Medical providers may not bill injured workers. In fact, billing directly is grounds for revocation of the board's authorization. Providers should submit medical bills directly to the insurance carrier or self-insured employer. Form A9 is the only exception, and that'll be discussed shortly. Providers can search for an employer's workers' compensation insurance carrier on the board's website at wcb.ny.gov. Bills must be submitted within 90 days of the last day of the month in which services were rendered. Hospitals must submit bills within 120 days of the last day of the month in which services were rendered. Providers may request that injured workers sign Form A9. The name of the form is Notice that you may be responsible for medical costs in the event of failure to prosecute or if compensation claim is disallowed. This form can be found at wcb.ny.gov. Reports submitted to the Workers' Compensation Board are evidence in the workers' compensation case. Testimony and depositions. Another role that medical providers may play in the workers' compensation system is providing testimony and depositions. The following providers may be called upon to testify or be deposed: physicians, chiropractors, podiatrists, psychologists, nurse practitioners, and licensed clinical social workers. How are providers paid? Board-authorized providers are reimbursed for services according to medical fee schedules, which are available for purchase via Optum. There are fee schedules for each provider and service type. Authorized providers, stress claims. The New York State workers' compensation system is looking forward to providing more robust treatment options for workers who are injured or become ill on the job. There are some important points for new providers, such as licensed clinical social workers and psychiatric nurse practitioners, to keep in mind once they're authorized and able to treat injured workers. When addressing work-related mental stress claims, the claimant or injured worker would need to present medical evidence showing his or her stress experienced was greater than that which other similarly situated workers experience in the normal work environment. The exception to this is first responders, those who encounter extraordinary stress in a work-related emergency: police officers, firefighters, EMTs, paramedics, certified emergency medical providers, emergency dispatchers, and those with similar titles. Additionally, a worker with a mental stress claim is not eligible for workers' compensation benefits if the stress is a direct consequence of a lawful personnel decision involving a disciplinary action, work evaluation, job transfer, or termination taken in good faith by the employer. Consequential psychological injuries. Some workers may experience consequential psychological injuries, such as depression or post-traumatic stress disorder, as a result of their initial injury or illness. The medical report would need to show that the psychological injury was a direct and natural consequence of the initial physical injury. For example, a claimant injures his back at work and is out of work for several months due to the back injury. The claimant then becomes depressed as a direct result of his back injury and inability to work or perform daily living activities. The new provider authorization process. Medical providers apply for authorization online via the medical portal on the board's website. As part of the authorization process, providers must sign up to request access to the medical portal and receive user credentials. Complete all required training prior to applying for board authorization, and complete the online authorization application in one sitting. Providers should have the following information compiled prior to beginning an authorization application: first, middle, and last name, date of birth, mailing address, the practice's address, New York State license number, the authorized and registered supervising physician's authorization, name, and license number, if applicable. If you are a physician's assistant, you will need to provide this information when applying for authorization. Individual National Provider Identifier, email address, list of languages the practice can accommodate, the practice's website, copies of board certifications, if applicable, for example, through the American Board of Medical Specialties, the American Osteopathic Association, or the National Certification Commission for Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine. Disciplinary information, Workers' Compensation Board prior authorization number, if applicable, curriculum vitae or resume. It's important to note that a provider may not treat any workers' compensation claimants unless and until the provider's application has been approved and the provider is authorized by the board. Physician applicants must also simultaneously submit an authorization application to the medical society of the county in which the physician's primary office is located, or to the county medical society designated by such county society, or to the New York State Osteopathic Medical Association, if they're an osteopathic physician. The Workers' Compensation Board will then consider the recommendation of the County Medical Society in approving the authorization. For more information on the healthcare provider authorization process, please visit the board's website at wcb.ny.gov, where you'll also find detailed information, forms, and other resources related to workers' compensation. Thank you for viewing this introductory training on the workers' compensation system. To stay informed on board news, trainings, and other updates, you can subscribe to receive email notifications at wcb.ny.gov/notify.